Lord, I'm glad for it. Because that love is what motivated you to reach out to us and make a connection with you possible through your Son Jesus. Your love enabled you to give us your word to hold in our hands, to read it and to feed on and to nurture our spirit and to help us become what you have called us to be. Lord, thank you for the opportunity today to just tune our ears to understand the mystery of God a bit more. Lord, help us to understand the rich treasure it is that's been entrusted to us. Speak to us now, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. It's a house in Rome. And in that house is a man, from all accounts, probably a short man, probably a hunchback, with chains, chained to a Roman soldier. And he is dictating a letter to his beloved people. The man's name is Paul. Under house arrest in the city of Rome, chained 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to a Roman soldier. And from that house he wrote to us 4 amazing letters. The book of Ephesians, the book of Colossians, and Philippians, and Willamina. From our perspective, we would look at that and say, man, that's really a bummer to be in jail, to be in prison and not have freedom. But Paul didn't see it that way. If you read Philippians 1, it's amazing. He talks about his condition, and he said, I want you to know that what's happened to me has turned out to accomplish great things. You see, because through my imprisonment, it has become known to everyone that I am in chains for Christ. And that the message has become known throughout the entire Roman guard. And I think about Paul's situation, I have a suspicion that maybe the prisoners wondered, or the guards wondered who the prisoner actually was. Because they were chained to a man who was passionately in love with Jesus. And for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that's what they heard. And some suggest because of that saturation in the gospel that there were many within the Praetorian Guard in the Roman elite fighting force who found faith in Jesus. So Paul looks at it and says, Yahoo! And he's writing to the Ephesians. We've been blessed by being able to look at the first 2 chapters. And as we've gone through those 2 chapters, we have seen Jesus revealed. We saw Jesus as the game changer. A Jesus who transforms lives. And I just want to let you know, those of you who weren't here last night, you missed a tremendous testimony of Jesus the game changer. John, I appreciated you sharing your testimony from the last night. Jesus the game changer. Last week we talked about Jesus the peacemaker, how he has brought the 2 together in one. And today we're going to come to chapter 3, and he's going to take that next step, and we're going to see Jesus, the mystery of God. He opens chapter 3 kind of reflectively. He opens with the words. It says, for this reason. It's a statement that refers back. Because of everything I've said so far, because of he's transformed your life, because the church is what it is, for this reason, I, Paul, a prisoner of Christ. Now notice he doesn't say the prisoner of Rome. The prisoner of Christ. And I think his imprisonment started back on the road to Damascus. On the way to Damascus. That's when he was taken captive. And he's simply in Rome as a prisoner of Christ. And he says, for this reason, I, Paul, the prisoner of Christ, Jesus, for the sake of the Gentiles. And this is why I love Paul, because he interrupts himself. Dolores, sentences hanging. Because I'll start a sentence and all of a sudden another fellow comes to mind and I go with it. That's Paul. For the sake of the Gentiles, and he's going to pick up the thought again in verse 14. But then he interrupts himself and he writes these words. Surely you have heard about the administration of God's grace that was given to me for you. That is the mystery made known to me by revelation. As I have already written briefly, in reading this, then you will be able to understand my insight into the mystery of Christ, which was not made known to men in other generations, as it has now been revealed by the Spirit to God's holy apostles and prophets. The mystery is that through the gospel, the Gentiles are heirs together with Israel, members together of one body, and sharers together in the promise in Christ Jesus. I became a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace given me through the working of his power. Although I am less than the least of all God's people, this grace was given to me to preach to the Gentiles the unsearchable riches of Christ, and to make plain to everyone the administration of this mystery, which for ages past was kept hidden in God, who created all things. His intent was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms, according to his eternal purpose, which he accomplished in Christ Jesus our Lord. In him, and through faith in him, we may approach God with freedom and confidence. I ask you, therefore, not to be discouraged because of my sufferings for you, which are your glory. Paul interrupts himself and says, let me tell you about this mystery. The mystery of God revealed in Jesus. And he starts off right off the bat. He says the mystery explained, and it's in verse 6. The mystery is this: through the gospel, that is the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, the Gentiles are heirs together. If you want to emphasize that, take your Bible and underline the word together. Notice he uses it 3 times. He pounds that home. They are heirs together with Israel, members together of one body, sharers together in the promise of Christ. Do you think Paul understands the importance of the unity and the idea that Jesus intended the church to be one and united with one another? That's the mystery. Now, Paul goes back, and we go back a little in those verses. He's going to tell us some things about that mystery. Number 1, he says it is an administration of God's grace. Some of your translations might have the word dispensation. Some might have stewardship. But the word Paul uses means rules of the house. How many of your houses have rules? We probably have different rules. Because that's the way you have order in a house, is by having rules. Some of them may be that you take off your shoes when you come in the door. Maybe some you have to sit at the table. I found some that I found interesting. This is house rules. If you open it, close it. If you turn it on, turn it off. If you unlock it, lock it. If you break it, repair it. If you can't fix it, call in someone who can. If you borrow it, return it. If you use it, take care of it. If you make a mess, clean it up. If you move it, put it back. If it belongs to someone else and you want to use it, get permission. If you don't know how to operate it, leave it alone. If it doesn't concern you, don't mess with it. I like those rules. There's another one. I like this one even better. Our family rules: pray often, always. Find your identity in Christ. Show the same grace to others that God showed you. Encourage others. Love others. Laugh and laugh hard. Be kind. Listen. No yelling or elbowing. Be first to say sorry. Slow dance in the kitchen. Always be looking for ways to serve others. Be thankful. Fill the house with music, worship. Hug one another daily. And consider pure joy when you face trials. Those are just some rules says this administration of grace was given me, he is talking to us about the fact that these are God's house rules. If you want to know about living in the household of God, Paul says God's revealed it to us through this message that I preach. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it as we get into chapter 4, but we're going to leave behind the theological and doctrinal, and in chapter 4 he's going to start hitting it hard about what those rules are. What does it look like to live in God's house? Be a member of his family. So the first thing is that it's an administration of God's grace, the house rules. But it's a message that was once hidden and has now been revealed. This is going to date me. How many of you remember the show Concentration? Remember the TV show on... You aren't old enough to remember that, Luke?
Yeah, I was. I watched it when I was a kid.
There used to be a TV game show on called Concentration, and it had a wall with no electronics involved. It was just a wall with some tiles, and they'd flip them around, and they would reveal a picture. And the goal of the game was to take those pictures and decipher the message that was hidden in the pictures. And once you revealed it all, and people knew the message. That is kind of the hint of the way Paul has in mind. He's not talking about the fact that no one knew it. God understood it. And it doesn't say there weren't any hints. Because if you read the Old Testament, you can't help but find Jesus. From Genesis to Malachi, Jesus fills it. The trouble is, all those clues and hints, men never quite put together to figure it all out, because it wasn't time. If you look at 1 Peter 1, 10 through 12, Peter talks about the prophets. And they wanted to know what they were writing about, but God revealed them that they were not writing for themselves, but they were writing for you, that you would know the mystery. The mystery of God was revealed. Revealed how? Well, first through Jesus. When Jesus came to earth, the mystery began to be peeled back, and Jesus began revealing the heart of God, revealing what he was doing as he worked with the 12 disciples. As he came to that night of and the death, burial, and resurrection, the veil was pulled back further. And then on Pentecost, we see the mystery really becoming revealed. But even then it wasn't fully revealed, because in Acts chapter 10, you remember Acts chapter 10, Peter is on the rooftop, and God lowers down a sheet full of these unclean animals, and he says, "Arise, kill and eat." And Peter says, "I've never touched anything unclean in my life." So he goes through that 3 times, and then he gets a knock on the door, and God says, "I want you to go and preach the gospel to a Gentile." The first Gentile, the first non-Jew. And Peter went and he explained his feelings, explained all the rules. And what was Peter's conclusion? Now I know that God is no respecter of persons. That he is called all men. And so it began to open the veil. But even then, there were those who said, "No, that can't be right." And so it doesn't happen until Paul begins preaching. At Damascus, God says, "I'm sending you to the Gentiles. You're going to preach the gospel." You remember the conflict that arose? People saying, "No, that can't be right." In Acts 15, the church has a meeting in Jerusalem, and they reconcile the conflict. And they come away with an understanding God has indeed opened the door for all nations in Christ. It's been a gradual revelation, but it continues to be revealed even today. For Paul, Galatians 1, 11 through 17, he tells how that happened. It started on the road to Damascus. Some suggest that it even happened further down the road when he it reveals our standing and our position with Christ. In the letters of Paul, we find out what the lifestyle of the Christian is to be, and we find out our destiny. We can't understand the mystery of God without reading and studying this, folks. To let God open our eyes and illuminate our hearts. So it's written. We understand through writing. But then he moves on in verses 7 through 10 to talk to us about the proclamation. Ephesians 3, 7 through 10. You know, in the 38 years of our marriage, I find it very hard to buy Dolores a gift and keep it a secret. You know, when we were first married, I'd buy a Christmas gift or a birthday gift, and I'd want to give it to her right away. It killed me to keep it a secret. And I was even guilty of dropping hints, trying to help her figure it out. Because I wanted her to know I had a gift, and so it's difficult. Even today, I have to fight that, I have to resist that, because I want her to know how great a husband I am. Yeah, right. What are you laughing about?
Stop laughing.
I want her to know. I want to proclaim the secret. I want to share that with her. And by the way, that's why I always wait till the last minute to buy her a gift.
Yeah.
That's my story. I'm sticking to it. That way I don't have to keep it a secret. But Paul talks about the proclamation. We've had the mystery of God revealed, just the secret of God revealed. And anytime it comes to a point of a secret, you have to decide what you're going to do with that, right? And so Paul talks about the proclamation. But he starts in verse 7. I want you to listen to those words and think about Paul for a moment. I became a servant of this gospel by the gift of God's grace. What do you know about Paul? What do you know about his background? If you could remember Paul's background, and Paul is sitting in this jail cell with his house with chains on, a guard by his side, and he reflects on who he is and where he has come from, he is absolutely overwhelmed by the immense grace of God. That God can take a man who was an arrogant, rule-keeping Pharisee, a man who stood by and held coats while men literally bashed the brains out of a young man by the name of Stephen and gave approval to it. A man who pursued the church with one intent, and that was to destroy the church completely. How much grace does it take for God to stop you on the road to Damascus and say, Paul, it's time for you to come and do the task I have for you to do. You think there were times in Paul's life he said, who am I? Who am I that God should use me? Who am I? I deserve the fire of hell. I received this stewardship, this gift, by grace. Look at verse 8. Although I am less than the least of God, all God's people. That doesn't quite fit the image of Paul that we have of him, does it? We put Paul on a pillar, pedestal, great preacher, great evangelist, and yet Paul says, in comparison to God's people, I'm lower than dirt. What does that tell us about the proclamation? I think it tells us that it requires absolute humility. Absolute understanding that my ability to preach the message of God is not about who I am. not about what I am. It's not about the skills I have, but it has everything to do with who God is and what God is able to do through someone who submits to Him. So if you're here today saying, I just don't think God can use me, I'm not sure any of you are murderers. If God can use Paul, He can use you. If you have the humility that says, who am I? Who am I that I should be used in such a way? So Paul begins talking about the messenger. There's no arrogance, there's no pride, it's all humility. And he talks about the message. He describes it in two terms. He says first to the Gentiles, and when I use the word Gentiles, I want you to put nations. I want you to think of those outside of Jesus, those who don't know Jesus as Savior. To those people, the proclamation of Paul was the unsearchable riches in Christ. You remember when we started this message, I put a picture of a treasure room filled with gold, filled with all kinds of treasure we could never account and measure. And what Paul says is, I am preaching a message of invitation for all men to step into the treasure room of God. Unsearchable, immeasurable. You never reach the end of it. We preach the message of forgiveness and grace that has no limit. Oh, come on, isn't that worth an amen? That there is never an end to God's patience with us. There's never an end to God's forgiveness for us. There's never an end to the grace that flows to us. There is no end, no measure that God is not willing to give us. And that's the message we have to take to our world. The unsearchable, unlimited riches of God given to us through Christ. For all who will come to Him. The second part of it, he says in verse 10, verse 9, and to make plain to everyone the administration of this mercy. Now that's a little bit different. You see, the first one is the gospel. Come and know Jesus, know the riches. This one, the administration of the mystery. What did I say the word administration meant? House rules. Paul says, part of my responsibility is to make sure everyone knows what the Christian life looks like. What does it mean to be a child of God? What are the things that God expects of us? And he's going to take that and begin building on it in chapter 4. Making sure everyone knows what the rules are. We're not going to become rule keepers, but these are the things God says my children will do and my children will be. But there's an interesting aspect to this. There's a corporate aspect to this. Do you notice that in verse 10? He says his intent was that now, through the church, that's us. Through the church, we as a body declare what? What's he say? Okay. The manifold wisdom of God. We are the one, and that manifold is faceted. It's the image of a diamond that has a different face every time you turn it. The church proclaims the message of God's wisdom to who? Look at your text again. I'm trying to get you engaged, man. Pick up your Bibles. The rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. Who are they? Well, it's part of it, but there's more. The rulers and the authorities in the heavenly realms. That is the spirit world. The angels of heaven understand what God is up to by watching us. That's scary. As the church comes together, Gentile and Jew come together and become one body, one family together, the angels are able to look down and say, oh, now I get it. 1 Peter 1:12 says, the angels of heaven long to look into these things. We're it. We are the declaration of God's wisdom by our living together. But there's also another aspect to it, and that is 1 Corinthians 2:8. It says, Paul writes, and he says, if the rulers of this world had understood what God was up to, they would have never killed Jesus. It is through the church that Satan himself discovers what God is up to. Does that suggest to you why Satan and his demons may have as their first priority keeping the church in disunity and in conflict with each other? See, what happens when a church fragments? The message is destroyed. Jesus said, by this all men will know you are my disciples if you love one another. Through the unity of the church, the spirit world understands God's wisdom. That kind of sets up chapter 6 as we get to that. Because Satan has it as his number one priority to keep the message of God from being spread. And the unity of the church is probably the first and foremost means of that message happening. So not only are we individually responsible and privileged, each one of us, like Paul, has the opportunity to go out and talk to people about the unsearchable riches of God. But as a congregation, we have the privilege and responsibility of declaring to the spirit world and to our community the manifold wisdom of God in the way that we relate to one another and connect with one another. Folks, that's why it's important, and I don't want to beat people up, but that's why it's important last night that we should have been here. Connecting with the church. That's our purpose statement, remember? We should have been here last night to give a testimony to our community and to the world. That's why it's important for us as Christians to want to get together when we have things going on to show that unity and that love. How well are we proclaiming the message by the way we interact with one another? I know, I'm stepping on toes. But I want to go to the mystery's implications. I wrestled with this third point, trying to come up with a word, but the one is the implications. When you have a mystery, when you have a secret revealed, you have some choices to make, right? Am I going to tell the secret? Even if they don't want me to tell the secret, am I going to share that secret? What does that secret give me that I couldn't have without? And sometimes having somebody's secret power. Power over the one you know the secret about. Power over those who want to know the secret. That's not the kind of implication I'm talking about here. Paul talks about the implications. Number one is access to God. Look at verse 11 and 12. According to his eternal purpose, which he accomplished in Christ Jesus our Lord, in him and through faith in him, we may approach God with freedom and confidence. We have access to God. Free access. That word freedom means open-faced, without shame. I come to God knowing that my sin is covered, my guilt has been taken away, and I come to God able to look him in the eye. Confidence, knowing that he's going to accept me. Why? Well, here's the key, because when dealing with a personage like that, you need someone to go ahead of you and announce you or introduce you. Why do I have freedom and confidence to come before God? Because Jesus himself has gone into the presence of God and announced to the Father, Father, Logan wants to see you. Becca wants to see you. Becca's here, wants to talk to you. Think about that for a moment. Every time we come to God in prayer, Jesus speaks to the Father on our behalf. In essence, He says, one of your children is here. Listen. It's like going to the governor's office. You don't just go busting into the office. You wait for someone to introduce you and you sit down with reverence and respect and talk to them. But we have freedom to approach God at any time. When I started ministry and started having kids, the number one rule I had, and I usually didn't have to use it because I never had a secretary to answer my phone for me, but the rule was going to be if my wife or kids called, didn't matter what I was doing, I was available. There was no, have them call me back a couple hours from now, I'll be free. I picked up the phone and I talked. That's the access we have to God. God doesn't say, come back in a couple hours when I'm not so busy, I'll talk to you. God says, come on in, sit down, let's talk. Isn't that a great Isn't that a great gift that God's given us? To be able to come before the God of the universe and have a personal conversation with Him. And the second one is even better. Opposition from others. Go back to the first verse. Where was Paul at? House arrest. No freedom. Now, the question is, we get that from the world. And we're obviously seeing, if you look at the life of Paul, he went to communities and people there rose up and they persecuted him, chased him out of town. But unfortunately, most of the time the opposition towards Paul and the gospel came not from those in the world, but those in the religious circle. Read through the book of Acts, and it says the Jews traveled from place to place, stirring up trouble for Paul. Why? He was preaching to Gentiles. He was preaching that God loved everybody, and God wanted everybody to come into relationship with Jesus, and that was something they couldn't handle. It was outside the lines. Think about the life of Jesus. Who gave Jesus the biggest trouble? Who were the church? Jesus hung out with people that they didn't approve of. He hung out with tax collectors. He hung out with prostitutes. He hung out with sinners. And they said he is a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Like that is the worst thing in the world he could be. They accused him of being a glutton and a drunkard because he went where parties were happening to talk to people. Folks, if we get serious, when we get serious about touching people in our community, touching people that maybe don't look like us, people that don't hang out where we hang out, there will be people within the church who may call us drunkards. There may be people who may call us friends of sinners. That would be a badge I'd gladly wear, folks. Amen. When we get serious about proclaiming the message, people are going to push back. And unfortunately, sometimes it's going to be people within the walls of this building who wear the name Christian. The mystery of God, that Gentiles and Jews are one body, heirs together, members of one body, members together and sharers together of the promise in Christ. Let me close with Matthew chapter 13, verse 11. Jesus was telling parables, and the disciples came and said, "Why do you keep telling parables?" And this is what he said: "To you has been given the secrets, or the secret of the kingdom of God. that kind of goes with what we're talking about today. I'm revealing to you what God's up to. And everyone in this room who knows Jesus, who has claimed Him as their Savior and living with Him as their Lord, you have been entrusted with the secret of the kingdom of God. Why did Jesus reveal that to the apostles? So they could walk around saying, nah, I know something you don't know. Aha, you just don't know what I know. Why did He tell them? So they could tell other people. So that they would go out and tell the secret of God's kingdom. That is our privilege and our responsibility. That is the greatest work in the world, to reveal the mystery of God. So this morning, or this afternoon now, I guess the one thing I want to know, you want to know is, if you're here today and have never made Jesus Savior, if you've never claimed Him, I want you to know the unsearchable riches of Christ. And I want to invite you to get the key that allows you to step into God's treasure room and find all that He has to give you. If you're here and have the name Christ tattooed upon your heart, my invitation for you is to go out and share that secret, to reveal the mystery to a world that doesn't understand what life is all about, and help them find the riches of God. Let's pray. Father, thank you for entrusting us with the message of hope, the mystery of God, the mystery that you established before the beginning of time and have revealed throughout ages, and now been made clear through Jesus. Lord, help us to celebrate that mystery. Help us to share that mystery, not to become an exclusive club that keeps it to ourselves, but to invite them in to share in the promise of Christ. Lord, help us to yield our hearts to you. And Lord, if there is anyone here today who doesn't know Jesus, who isn't in Jesus and hasn't placed their faith in Him, I would pray that your Spirit would draw them to claim the unsearchable riches of Christ, to make that decision and to find life that they never knew possible. Lord, speak to us. Draw us by your power. In Jesus' name, amen.